Scarlett had always believed that love was built on trust, on the quiet certainty that the person you chose would never betray you. When she married Lucas 5 years ago, she thought they were a team, partners navigating life together. He was charming, responsible, the kind of man who always seemed in control. She handled the finances, not because he was careless, but because he simply wasn't as detail-oriented. It worked, until the day it didn't. The first sign was small, easy to overlook. A bank notification. A slightly lower balance than she expected. Maybe she had forgotten about a bill. Maybe Lucas had used the card and simply forgotten to mention it. But as the days passed, the discrepancies grew harder to ignore. Odd withdrawals, vague charges labeled as consulting or loan repayments when neither of them had taken out loans. The first time she asked Lucas about it, he barely looked up from his phone. Nothing to worry about, he said, his tone so casual it unsettled her. And maybe, if she had been someone else, she would have let it go. But Scarlett had spent too many years trusting blindly. This time, she wasn't going to ignore the warning signs. Scarlett couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The numbers didn't lie, no matter how much she wanted to believe Lucas. So one afternoon, while he was at work, she sat down with her laptop and pulled up their bank statements. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she scrolled, scanning each transaction with growing unease. The pattern was unmistakable. Withdrawals of a few $100s at a time. Always spaced a few weeks apart. Always labeled with vague descriptions that meant nothing. At first, she thought it might be a mistake. Some sort of banking error. But then she noticed the recipient's name. Adrian. Scarlett's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the screen. Adrian, Lucas's ex, the man he had supposedly cut ties with years ago. A sickening wave of realization crashed over her. This wasn't just an oversight. This was deception. Her husband had been funneling money to his ex behind her back. Her mind raced, cycling through possibilities, explanations, anything to soften the betrayal. But deep down, she already knew the truth. Lucas had been lying to her. The only question left was why. And Scarlett intended to find out, no matter the cost. Scarlett sat across from Lucas at the dinner table, her heart pounding in her chest as she forced herself to stay composed. The scent of roasted garlic and butter filled the air, but she had lost her appetite the moment she saw his face. He ate casually, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. She gripped the folded bank statements under the table, her fingers pressing into the paper as she studied him. "Have you spoken to Adrian lately?" she asked, keeping her tone light. Lucas froze for half a second, just a flicker of hesitation before he scoffed and shook his head. "Adrian?" he repeated, forcing a chuckle. "No, why would I?" Scarlett's stomach twisted. She had been hoping, praying, he'd have a different answer. But instead, he lied to her without a second thought. Wordlessly, she slid the folded papers across the table. Lucas's eyes flickered down, and she saw the exact moment realization hit him. His jaw tightened, his fingers twitching slightly as he stared at the transactions, each one labeled with Adrian's name. "So," she said, her voice steady despite the fury burning inside her, "do you want to try that answer again?" Lucas exhaled sharply, his eyes darting between Scarlett and the bank statements spread out before him. His mask of casual indifference cracked, revealing something raw beneath, guilt, maybe, or something even darker. He swallowed hard and pushed the papers aside as if dismissing them could erase what they revealed. "It's not what you think," he muttered, his voice lower now, almost pleading. Scarlett tilted her head, feigning curiosity while fury burned beneath her skin. "Oh," she said, folding her arms, "then by all means, explain it to me." Lucas ran a hand through his hair, fingers tangling in the strands. A nervous tic she knew all too well. Adrian was struggling. He started, his voice strained. He needed help, and I. "You what?" Scarlett interrupted, leaning forward. "You drained our savings, lied to me for months, sent thousands of dollars to your ex without a word?" "It wasn't like that," Lucas shot back, his tone sharp now. "You wouldn't understand." Scarlett let out a humorless laugh. "You're right, I wouldn't, because when I married you, I thought we were partners. But clearly, I was wrong." Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but the weight of his silence spoke louder than any excuse ever could. Scarlett's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. The anger inside her burned hot, but beneath it was something colder, sharper: betrayal. Lucas had taken from her, had stolen not just money but trust, security, the foundation of their marriage. And for what? To send it to Adrian? The ex he never talked about, the one he claimed was in his past? Her mind raced as she pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of Adrian's apartment complex. She wasn't sure what she expected to find: some smug, manipulative leech reveling in his victory, enjoying the luxury Lucas had afforded him. But when Adrian opened the door, his face etched with confusion rather than guilt, Scarlett faltered. "What are you talking about?" he asked, staring at the bank statements she shoved at him. "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You've been draining Lucas's accounts for months." Adrian's brows furrowed. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "I never asked him for a dime." Scarlett's stomach dropped. "What?" Adrian stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. "If Lucas has been sending me money, it wasn't for me. It was for something else. Something you don't know about." Scarlett's breath hitched as she scanned the messages on Adrian's phone, her fingers tightening around the device. This wasn't what she expected, not at all. The texts weren't demands for money or proof of a manipulative scheme. They were something far worse. Lucas hadn't just been sending Adrian money, he had been begging him to take it. Pleading, promising that it would fix things, that it would make up for something. Scarlett's pulse pounded in her ears. She scrolled through the messages, each one unraveling the story she thought she knew. "I owe you this. Please just take it. I can't live with myself if I don't do something. You don't have to forgive me, but at least let me help." The messages went back months, a hidden trail of guilt and desperation. She looked up at Adrian, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" Adrian exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's not about money, Scarlett." His eyes met hers, dark with something unreadable. "It's about a secret Lucas has been keeping from you, one that he's been trying to erase with every single payment he's sent me." Scarlett's stomach twisted. Whatever it was worse than she ever imagined. Scarlett sat in stunned silence, the weight of Adrian's words sinking in. A secret, one that Lucas had tried to bury beneath layers of guilt and hush money. Her fingers trembled as she set the phone down, feeling the world tilt beneath her. "Tell me," she whispered, her voice barely steady. "What is he hiding?" Adrian hesitated, his jaw tightening before he exhaled sharply. "Scarlett, I didn't take the money because I wanted it. I took it because I knew he was desperate, because I wanted to know why." He ran a hand through his hair, his expression dark with something close to pity. "Lucas wasn't just sending me money. He was trying to make up for something that happened years ago, something that involves you." Her breath hitched. "Me?" Adrian nodded, his gaze locking onto hers. "You remember the night you found out about him and Vanessa? The night everything started falling apart?" Scarlett's heart pounded. Of course, she remembered. The betrayal, the lies, the feeling of her world collapsing. Adrian leaned in, voice low. "Lucas had another secret that night, one he never told you. And when you find out what it is, you're never going to look at him the same way again." Scarlett's hands clenched into fists as she replayed Adrian's words over and over in her mind. A secret from that night, something Lucas had buried so deep he thought money could erase it. She had spent years believing the worst of him had already been exposed, his betrayal, his deception, but now, standing on the edge of an even darker truth, she felt her breath quicken. She needed answers. By the time she reached Lucas's office, her pulse was a steady roar in her ears. She pushed through the door without knocking, catching him off guard. He looked up from his desk, eyes widening at the sight of her. But she didn't wait for pleasantries. "Adrian told me everything," she said, her voice cold, controlled. Lucas stiffened, his expression unreadable. "Everything?" Scarlett nodded, stepping closer, her gaze unrelenting. "So, tell me, what really happened that night?" For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, Lucas sighed, running a hand down his face as if bracing himself for impact. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. You think you know the worst of me, Scarlett, he said bitterly. You have no idea. Scarlett had never felt such an overwhelming mix of fury and devastation. The weight of Lucas's confession pressed down on her, every word unraveling the last threads of whatever trust remained between them. He had lied, again. He had buried the truth, thinking it would never surface. But secrets had a way of clawing their way into the light. And now that she knew, there was no undoing it. She turned away from him, her hands trembling. I could have forgiven the money, she whispered, her voice hollow. The lies, even, but this? You let me build my life on a foundation that was never real. Lucas stepped forward, but she recoiled, shaking her head. He had always been able to manipulate his way out of trouble, using charm and half-truths as his weapons, but not this time. I did it for you, he said, desperation creeping into his voice. To protect us. Scarlett let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You didn't do it for me. You did it for yourself. The finality in her voice sent a crack through the room, and for the first time, Lucas seemed to realize he hadn't just lost control of the situation. He had lost her. Scarlett stood at the edge of the ocean, the waves lapping at her feet, the cool evening breeze carrying away the last remnants of the woman she used to be. The storm had passed. Lucas was gone. His lies, his betrayals, the weight of his deception, none of it had power over her anymore. She had spent so long entangled in his web, believing in love that had never truly belonged to her. But now, standing here with nothing but the open horizon ahead, she felt something she hadn't in years. Freedom. Beside her, Mira gave her a knowing glance, her fingers loosely intertwined with Scarlett's. You did the right thing, she said softly, walking away. Scarlett exhaled, letting go of the last of her doubts. There had been a time when she feared leaving Lucas meant losing herself. But the truth was, she had found herself in the process. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak, it had all been necessary to get here. Turning to Mira, she smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. I know, she said. As the waves erased their footprints in the sand, Scarlett took a step forward. This time, she wasn't looking back. Scarlett's story is a reminder that walking away from betrayal isn't a loss, it's a reclamation of self-respect. In life, we often cling to relationships, jobs, or situations that no longer serve us, fearing the unknown, but true strength lies in knowing when to let go. Trust is fragile, and when broken, no amount of excuses or apologies can mend what has been shattered. If you ever find yourself doubting your worth because of someone else's choices, remember, you are not obligated to stay where you are undervalued. Choose yourself, embrace change, and never be afraid to start again.